The town of Pineridge, nestled in a valley surrounded by towering mountains, had always enjoyed a quiet, peaceful existence. The days followed the usual rhythm: sunrise, sunset, seasons changing predictably, and the people going about their daily lives. But all of that changed one fateful winter when the sun refused to rise. At first, the townspeople thought it was just an unusually long night, perhaps caused by strange atmospheric conditions. But as the hours dragged on and turned into days, panic set in. The sun never came. The town was plunged into an unending darkness with no explanation, and soon the unsettling events began. On the first day, or what should have been the first day, the townspeople of Pineridge gathered in the town square, confused but hopeful. It was winter, and while long nights were typical, no one had ever seen anything like this. The sky remained pitch black, with not even the faintest hint of dawn on the horizon. The stars, usually so bright in this remote place, seemed to be swallowed by an oppressive darkness. "We'll wait for morning," the town's mayor said, trying to calm the growing anxiety. "It's likely a strange weather pattern. The sun will rise soon." The people returned to their homes, lighting every candle and lantern they could find. They tried to resume their routines, but something about the air felt wrong, thick and heavy, as though the darkness itself was pressing down on the town. By the end of the first day, the absence of light had begun to weigh on everyone. The cold became more intense, creeping through the streets and into every home. The night felt alive, as if something was lurking just beyond the edge of sight, watching, waiting. After 3 days, the town was in chaos. The sun had not risen once. The sky remained as dark as the deepest hours of the night. The temperature had dropped even further, and no one could explain what was happening. Some of the townspeople suggested it was a natural disaster. Perhaps the sun had been blocked by an enormous cloud of volcanic ash, or the planet had shifted on its axis. But none of those theories could explain the eerie silence that had taken hold of the town. The birds no longer sang, and the usual sounds of wildlife had disappeared. By the end of the week, fear had turned to panic. The shops in town were looted for supplies. Candles, matches, and firewood became as valuable as gold. People began whispering about strange figures seen in the darkness, moving silently through the streets. There were rumors that the clocks had stopped, as though time itself was frozen in this endless night. Despite their best efforts, the townspeople couldn't keep track of time anymore. Days, hours, minutes, they all blended into one long, unbroken stretch of blackness. On what should have been the 8th day of darkness, the first person vanished. Her name was Maggie, a shopkeeper who had lived in Pineridge her entire life. She was last seen walking home from her store, carrying an armful of candles, but she never made it. Her house, just a few blocks away, was undisturbed, her door locked from the outside. It was as if she had simply vanished into the void. Search parties scoured the town, lighting torches and calling her name, but there was no sign of her. Maggie had disappeared, leaving no trace. The townspeople were terrified. Some claimed they had seen something move in the shadows, a tall figure with no face, watching from the edges of the light. Others spoke of hearing whispers in the darkness, soft, indistinct voices calling their names. By the end of the second week, more people had gone missing. One by one, they seemed to slip into the darkness and never return. The disappearances followed a pattern, always at night, when someone was alone just for a moment and then they were gone. As the days without light stretched into weeks, a sense of dread gripped Pineridge. The mayor tried to keep order, urging everyone to remain calm and stick together, but even they could not hide their fear. People began to barricade themselves inside their homes, afraid to step out into the endless night. Windows were covered with thick blankets, and doors were bolted shut. Families huddled around fireplaces, watching the flames flicker and die. No one dared to sleep too deeply for fear they would be taken in the dark. The few who ventured outside reported strange happenings. They described seeing flickers of movement at the edge of their vision, shadows that moved without any source of light, and there were sounds, soft footsteps in the snow, a whisper that carried on the wind, but no one could ever pinpoint where they came from. One man claimed to have seen a figure standing in the middle of the town square, tall and thin with long, spindly arms. He described its eyes as two glowing orbs, faintly visible in the dark, but when he approached it, the figure vanished like smoke. Some townspeople began to talk of a curse, a punishment for some unknown sin. Others speculated that the town had been cut off from the rest of the world, trapped in a bubble where time and light no longer existed. By the 4th week, the population of Pineridge had dwindled to less than half. Many had vanished, others had succumbed to the freezing cold or despair. The darkness seemed to weigh heavier with each passing day. growing thicker and more oppressive. The mayor gathered the remaining townspeople in the church, one of the few places where light still held the dark at bay. The flickering candles cast long shadows on the walls as everyone huddled together. "We need to leave," the mayor said, their voice strained. "This town is no longer safe. Whatever is out there, it's taking us one by one. We have to escape." But escape was easier said than done. The roads out of town were buried in deep snow, and the unrelenting cold had made travel nearly impossible. Some tried to leave on foot, heading toward the nearest city, but none of them returned. As hope began to fade, one of the townspeople, Claire, revealed that she had been studying the strange occurrences. She believed that whatever force had trapped them in darkness was centered on the town itself. If they could break through the darkness, perhaps they could find daylight again. Desperate and with nothing left to lose, the remaining townspeople decided to try. They gathered every source of light they had, torches, lanterns, and flashlights, and made their way to the edge of town. As they marched through the streets, their lights flickered and wavered, barely cutting through the thick, oppressive darkness. The cold gnawed at their bones, and the air felt like it was pressing down on them. Then, just as they reached the outskirts of Pineridge, they saw it, a wall of pure, impenetrable blackness, stretching across the road and blocking their path. It was as if the darkness had become a solid, living thing, trapping them in the town. Claire stepped forward, holding a torch in her trembling hand. "This is it," she whispered, "the source." With a deep breath, she plunged the torch into the wall of darkness. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the darkness recoiled, retreating as if in pain. A crack of light appeared, just a sliver, but it was enough. The townspeople pushed forward, forcing their way through the darkness. The wall trembled and shook, resisting their efforts. But inch by inch, they broke through. Finally, with one last push, they emerged on the other side. The light of dawn greeted them, weak and pale, but glorious after so many weeks in the dark. They had escaped the everlasting night. Pineridge was abandoned after that. No one dared return to the town, and over time it became a ghost story, a legend of a place where the sun stopped rising, where people vanished into the dark, never to return. The few who survived never spoke of what they had seen. They moved far from Pineridge, settling in cities and towns where the sun shone brightly every day. But at night, when the shadows grew long, they sometimes felt as if something was watching them, just out of sight, waiting, and they would remember the everlasting night and the town that was forever lost to the dark.